You already know the story of Lilith, or you think you do. Adam's first wife, made not from his rib, but from the same earth as him, his equal from the start. She refused to lie beneath him. She demanded to be treated as his equal, and when he would not yield, she spoke the secret name of God, and grew wings, and flew out of the Garden of Eden forever. And in her exile, she became something else, a demon of the night, a killer of infants, a queen of the dark. It is a powerful story. It has launched paintings, poems, and 1,000 arguments. There is only one problem. Open the book of Genesis and look for her. She is not there. Not the name, not the quarrel, not the flight from Eden. Not one word. Lilith may be the most famous character in the Bible who was never actually in it. So where did she come from? Tonight, we trace how a demon became a wife, and then a symbol. Here is the claim, and it is unusual because most of the figures we follow were at least partly inherited. Lilith was almost entirely built. She was not revealed, and she was not original. She was assembled, piece by piece, across thousands of years out of scraps and gaps and fears. A whole class of demons from ancient Mesopotamia. A single strange word buried in a Hebrew prophecy. Centuries of terror around childbirth and the magic people used to fight it. And at last, a medieval book that took all of it and half in earnest and half in jest made her Adam's first wife. And then in our own age, she was assembled all over again into something her makers would never have recognized. A heroine. Lilith is what grows in the cracks of a sacred text, and to watch her take shape, we begin with the first crack of all. A seam right at the start of the Bible, where two different stories sit uneasily side by side. Read the opening of Genesis slowly, and you find that the creation of human beings is told not once, but twice. In the first chapter, God creates humankind in a single stroke. The text says God created them male and female, together, at the same moment, both made in the divine image. Man and woman appear side by side. But in the second chapter, the story is different. God forms the man first, alone out of the dust. The man lives for a time by himself, and only later, seeing that it is not good for him to be alone, does God form the woman, and in this version, she is made from the man's own body, from his rib. So, which was it? Were man and woman made together as equals from the earth? Or was the man made first, and the woman second, from him? For centuries, careful readers noticed the contradiction, and it nagged at them. And one ancient solution was bold. What if both were true? What if there had been a first woman, created alongside Adam in chapter 1, before the Eve who was made from his rib in chapter 2? The Bible never says that. But the gap is there, an open seam between two stories. And into that seam, much later, someone would insert a name, Lilith. She begins, in a sense, not as a person at all, but as the answer to a puzzle in the text. But the name itself is far older than any story about Adam. To find its roots, we leave the Bible entirely and go down into Mesopotamia, more than 1,000 years before. In the ancient cultures of Sumer and Babylon, there was a whole family of feared spirits whose names sound like an echo of the one we are chasing. The lilitu, the lilut, the lili. These were not a single goddess or a single demon. They were a category, a class of restless night spirits, and people genuinely feared them. They were creatures of the wind and the dark. They were said to haunt desolate places, to slip into homes at night, and above all to prey on the vulnerable. They threatened women in childbirth and newborn children, and they were tied to dangerous desire, the spirits who came to sleeping people in the night, the kind of demon later ages would call a succubus, a spirit that seduces and drains and brings death where there should be new life. There is even a thread reaching back into the oldest Sumerian poetry. In one ancient tale, a dark female spirit takes up residence in the trunk of a sacred tree and has to be driven out before the tree can be cut. Some scholars have long read her name as an early ancestor of Lilith, though others doubt the link, and we should hold it loosely. What is not in doubt is the wider world these spirits belonged to. They were beings of the wind and the wasteland, and it is no accident that the name itself came to later ears to sound like an echo of the Hebrew word for night. Lilith would always be a creature of the dark hours. This is the raw material. Long before Lilith was anyone's wife, the word behind her name belonged to a swarm of Mesopotamian night demons, associated with darkness, with stolen sleep, with seduction, and with the death of mothers and infants. That cluster of fears would cling to her name for the rest of its history. Wherever Lilith goes, the dead baby and the dangerous night go with her. So how does that Mesopotamian night demon cross over into the Hebrew world? Through one solitary word in one verse in the entire Bible. The verse is in the book of Isaiah in a terrifying prophecy of a land laid waste. The prophet describes a ruined country, abandoned by people and given over to wild and eerie creatures. Wild cats meet hyenas. Wild goats call to one another. And there, in the list of things that haunt the desolation, appears the word lilit. That is the only time the name appears in the Hebrew Bible. Once. And even there, no one is entirely sure what it means. Translators have wrestled with it for centuries. Some render it as a night creature or a night bird, perhaps a screech owl crying in the ruins. Some translate it as a night hag or a night demon. And some simply give up and leave the word standing as a name, Lilith. And the demon reading is itself ancient. When the great scholar Jerome translated the passage into Latin, he reached for a name his readers would shudder at. He rendered the word as Lamia, the child-devouring she-demon of Greek and Roman nightmare. So already, more than 1,600 years ago, a leading translator looked at this one Hebrew word and saw, not a bird, but a monster who kills children. The old Mesopotamian dread was still clinging to the name, and it was quietly steering how the verse got read. Notice how thin this thread is. There is no story here. No first wife, no flight from Eden, no rebellion. There is only a single ambiguous word, dropped into a list of creatures that haunt a wasteland, carrying with it that old Mesopotamian shiver of the dangerous night. The Bible gives Lilith one word, and not even a clear one. Everything else would have to be built around it. And built it was not by theologians, but by ordinary frightened people. Because for centuries, long before anyone wrote down a tale of Adam's first wife, Lilith was real to people in the most practical possible way. She was the thing you protected your baby from. Archaeologists have recovered from the Jewish communities of ancient Babylonia thousands of objects we call incantation bowls. They are simple clay bowls, and on the inside, written in a spiral of Aramaic, are spells. People buried them under the floors and thresholds of their homes upside down to trap demons. And among the demons named again and again in these spells, sometimes as a whole tribe of them, the Liliths, is Lilith. The bowls treat her as a clear and present danger. She is the spirit who attacks the household, who threatens women in childbirth, who comes for the newborn in the night. And so people fought her with magic. They wrote out the spells. They invoked protective powers. There were amulets hung over the cradle or the birthing bed, calling on the names of 3 angels to guard mother and child, the angels Senoy, Sansenoy, and Semangelof. Some of these bowls are extraordinary to look at. The spell spirals inward to the center, where a demon is sometimes drawn, a crude bound figure with chains on her wrists and ankles, pinned in place by the very writing that circles her. Some bowls go further still, and are composed in the exact form of a legal document, a deed of divorce, formally divorcing the demon from the household and sending her away, as though she were an unwanted spouse being put out of the home. Centuries before any book called Lilith a wife, the magic was already treating her like one, binding her, divorcing her, casting her out of the house. This is the crucial point. Before Lilith was a character in any story, she was a fixture of daily fear and daily magic. She was the explanation for the unbearable, for the baby who died in the night, for the mother lost in childbirth. The story of who she was had not yet been written, but the dread of her and the charms against her were already everywhere. The bowls came first. The myth came later. And when the myth finally came, it would be written in part to explain the bowls. Now we arrive at the strangest turn in the whole story. The famous tale, the one everyone thinks comes from the Bible, comes instead from a single peculiar medieval book, a text called the Alphabet of Ben Sira, probably written somewhere around 1,000 years ago. The Alphabet of Ben Sira is not a solemn work of scripture. It is a strange, clever, often crude and satirical book, full of irreverent stories. And tucked inside it is the first known telling of Lilith as the first wife of Adam. The story is elegant because it solves all the older puzzles at once. God, it says, created Adam and Lilith at the same time, both from the earth, exactly as the first chapter of Genesis describes. And immediately they fight. The quarrel is about sex and about status. Lilith refuses to lie beneath Adam. Why should she argues, when they were both made the same way, from the same ground? They are equals. Adam insists on being above her. Neither will give in. And so Lilith acts. She speaks aloud the secret, ineffable name of God, the name of power, and with it she rises into the air and flies away, out of Eden, abandoning Adam entirely. Adam complains to God. God sends 3 angels after her to bring her back. And their names are Senoy, Sansenoy, and Semangelof, the very same 3 angels from the protective amulets. The angels find her over the sea and command her to return. She refuses. As a punishment, she is told that 100 of her own demon children will die every day. And in her grief and rage, she vows revenge on the children of Adam, swearing to prey on human infants forever. Unless, that is, she sees those 3 angels' names on an amulet guarding the child, then she must leave it alone. Do you see what the book has just done? It has written an origin story whose real purpose is to explain the magic that already existed. People had been hanging up amulets with those 3 angelic names for centuries. The Alphabet of Ben Sira supplies the tale that makes sense of them. It is, at least in part, a clever after-the-fact explanation, dressed as ancient history and quite possibly told with a smirk. The defiant first wife who demanded equality was born, it seems, in a medieval book that was half satire. It is worth being clear about what kind of book this was. The Alphabet of Ben Sira delights in shocking its reader, stringing together outrageous and often crude tales around a precocious child sage. It was never a creed and never a catechism. Whoever wrote the Lilith episode was not trying to add a doctrine to the faith. He was spinning a clever story that happened to knot together a puzzle in Genesis and the amulets hanging over every cradle. That a throwaway tale from such a book went on to conquer the Western imagination is one of the quiet jokes of history. Whatever its author intended, the story escaped him completely. Once Lilith was Adam's rebellious first wife, she could not be contained. The Jewish mystical tradition, the Kabbalah, seized on her and gave her a throne. In its dark cosmology, she became a towering demonic power, the queen of the demons, paired with a great evil figure named Samael as his consort, the female face of the demonic world. She grew far beyond a household pest. She became a principle of darkness itself, woven into a whole mystical map of good and evil. And in the folk imagination, the old fears hardened into custom. New mothers and newborns were watched and warded. Charms were kept close. The dangerous woman of the night was a living presence in the nursery for centuries across the Jewish world and beyond. Then, in the modern age, the figure turned inside out. The artists and poets of the 1800s rediscovered her as the ultimate dangerous beauty, the seductive, autonomous woman, painting her with her famous flood of hair. And in the 20th and 21st centuries, she was claimed again, this time as a heroine. Read her story now, many said, and look what it really shows. A woman who insisted she was equal, who refused to be placed beneath a man, who chose exile over submission and freedom over obedience. The baby-killing demon of the incantation bowls became, in our time, a symbol of female independence, her name attached to journals and gatherings and movement. The very same figure, the opposite meaning. The reversal is worth pausing on because it is so complete. The painters of the Romantic Age gave her a famous mane of hair and made her the deadly, self-possessed beauty who answers to no man. Then a later generation read the medieval quarrel as a manifesto. A feminist magazine took her name. So did festivals and study circles and gatherings of women. The argument she makes in the old story that she was created equal and will not be ranked beneath became almost word for word a modern creed. The figure first invented to frighten new mothers had become a banner for their daughters. And here is the turn, the thing that makes Lilith unlike almost anyone else we have followed. With most figures, there is an original buried somewhere underneath. A real older god, a genuine ancient text, a first version we can dig down to. With Lilith, there is no bottom, there is no single original to recover. She is, from beginning to end, a figure of the margins. Pull the threads apart and look at what she is actually made of. A seam between two creation stories that left a logical gap. A class of Mesopotamian demons that lent her a name and a menace. One ambiguous word in Isaiah that smuggled that name into Hebrew. Centuries of real grief over dead infants and the magic bowls and amulets people made to fight it. And a medieval satire that tied all of it together into a tale of Adam's first wife. Not one of those pieces is the true Lilith. She exists only as the sum of the gaps. And that, paradoxically, is the secret of her power. Because she was never fixed by scripture, never locked into a canon, never made official. She was never finished. She stayed liquid, free to be poured into whatever vessel each new age handed her. A demon to the frightened, a queen of darkness to the mystics, a femme fatale to the romantics, a liberator to the modern world. A figure made entirely of margins can become anything, precisely because the center never claimed her. So consider what we have watched tonight. A name that began as a swarm of night demons in Mesopotamia. A single, uncertain word in a prophecy of ruins. Thousands of clay bowls buried under thresholds to keep a baby killer at bay. And a medieval book, probably half-joking, that married that ancient dread to the first man and gave us the rebel wife of Eden. From those scattered scraps, with no single author and no official blessing, one of the most vivid figures in all of Western imagination quietly assembled herself. There is something fitting in the fact that she was born in a gap. Lilith lives in the space between two stories of how the first woman was made. And maybe that is the truest thing about her. She is a reminder that a tradition is not only what its sacred books contain, it is also what gathers in their cracks and silences, in the strange words and the awkward seams, in the fears people could not name and the magic they used against them. The margins have a life of their own, and sometimes the figure who haunts the edges outlives the ones at the center. We have spent this night among the demons of the dark, the spirits that fill the gaps below. But the tradition also filled the heights above, with bright and winged beings, with messengers and guardians and armies of the sky. We treat them as eternal, as obvious. And they have a hidden history, every bit as strange as Lilith's. So where did the angels come from? But that is a story for another night.